This is for educational use only. Our group grants permission for our instructor, Mr. Roldan Ardinis, to use this as educational material.
Learning objectives, LO 6.1. Define the term Global South. LO 6.2. Differentiate the Global South from the Third World. LO 6.3. Analyze how a new conception of global relations emerged from the experiences of Latin American countries. Topics. Define the term Global South, Global North. The global divide, develop, ascend. The global divides the North and the South. Said the difference between Third World and Global South. 5. The new conception of global relations emerged from the experiences of Latin American countries.
Good day! Today, let's talk about how the global divides the North and the South. Despite globalization, connecting economies and societies worldwide, inequality between nations still remains significant because some countries dominate global finance, trade, and technology, while others still struggle with poverty, debt, and underdevelopment. This divide is often explained using the term Global North and Global South. However, these are not just simply geographical labels. They represent differences in economic power, historical experiences, and political influence. In this report, we will going to define the terms about, first, how the global divides develop. Second is differentiate the term Global South from the concept of the Third World. And lastly is analyze how Latin American experiences reshape the global thinking about inequality.
Now let's talk about Global South. The term Global South refers to countries that generally experience lower levels of industrialization, income, and human development compared to wealthier nations. However, it is important to understand that Global South is not a geographical term. While many of these countries are located in Latin America, Africa, and parts of Asia, the classification is primarily based on economic positions and historical experience rather than the physical location. Now, the concept highlights shared industrial conditions including histories of colonization, dependence on exporting primary commodities, and the limited influence in international economic institutions. Rather than just suggesting inferiority, the term emphasizes how global systems of trade, finance, and politics can shape development outcomes. In this sense, the Global South represents countries that are positioned at a disadvantage within the global economic structure, not because of inherent weakness, but because of historical and systemic inequalities.
Defining the Global North. The Global North refers to economically developed and industrialized nations such as the United States, Japan, Germany, and Canada. So these countries typically have a high GDP income levels, advanced technology and infrastructures, strong political influence in global institutions. So the Global North plays dominant in role in international trade, finance, and decisions making. Many multinational corporations and financial institutions are based in these countries.
Good day everyone. So now I will explain how the global divide developed. The global divide developed through a historical process that created inequality between nations. First is colonialism, allowed European powers to extract resources and labor from Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and countries like the United Kingdom, France, and Spain and Portugal controlled colonies that supplied raw materials such as gold, cotton, and sugar. While Europe industrialized and became wealthy, the colonies remained dependent on exporting raw materials. This created long-term economic dependency. And the second one, the Industrial Revolution increased the wealth gap. It began in the United Kingdom and introduced machines, factories, and new technology. Industrialized countries gained stronger economies and military power, while many developing countries remained agricultural. Because of this, the gap between rich and poor nations widened. And the third one is the global financial system. Reinforced inequality institutions like the International Monetary Fund or IMF and the World Bank were created to stabilize the global economy. However, wealthier nations have greater voting power, which influences decisions. Developing countries often rely on loans, which can create long-term debt and dependency. So over time, these historical factors created structural inequality between industrialized and developing nations. The global divide today includes differences not only in income, but also in education, healthcare, technology, and political power.
Economic differences. Economically, the global north has diversified industries, advanced manufacturing, and strong service sectors. In contrast, many global south countries rely heavily on exporting raw materials such as minerals, agricultural products, or oil. These goods often have lower market value compared to finished products. For example, a developing country may export raw coffee beans but import expensive processed coffee products. So this creates trade imbalance and limits economic growth. So debt. Debt is also a major issue. Many global south countries borrow from international institutions, which sometimes to long-term financially dependency.
Today, I am going to talk about political and institutional power. The global north hold a significant influence and in global governance. An institution like the International Monetary Fund, wherein voting power is linked to financial contribution, while their nation therefore have the greater decision-making authority. This affect policies on loans, development programs, and economic reforms. As a result, global south countries might have a limited influence over decisions that directly impact their economies. This imbalance reflects not only economic inequality, but also political inequality.
Third World versus Global South. The term Third World emerged during the Cold War. Countries aligned with the United States were called the First World. Countries aligned with the Soviet Union or the Second World does not align with either level, the Third World. However, the term became problematic because it suggested inferiority. It focused on political alignment rather than structural inequality. It is historically outdated after the Cold War. The term Global South is now preferred because it highlights economic and historical realities rather than Cold War politics. It emphasizes shared experience of colonization and economic independency.
Latin American experience. Latin American countries play a major role in reshaping how global inequality is understood. And in the mid of 20th century, economists from the Economic Commissions for Latin America and the Caribbean argued that poverty in developing countries was not simply due to internal weakness. They introduced dependency theory, which claimed that global capitalism creates a system where wealthy countries benefits from the resources and labor of poorer countries. Instead of seeing development as a natural process where all countries eventually become rich. Dependency theories argue that the system itself keeps some countries dependent.
New conception of global relations. This perspective changed global thinking. Rather than blaming developing countries for being behind, scholars began analyzing structural inequality in global trade and finance. Latin American thinkers introduced the idea of a core periphery system, where core countries produce high-value industrial goods. Peripheral countries supply raw materials. This shifted global discussions from individual national failure to systematic global imbalance. This new conception continues to influence debates about trade reform, debt relief, and economic justice today.
In conclusion, the divide between the global North and global South is rooted in historical processes such as colonialism, industrialization, and unequal trade systems. The term Global South provides a more accurate and respectful framework than the outdated term Third World. The term Third World originally referred to countries that were not aligned with either the United States or the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Over time, it became associated with the poverty and underdevelopment. Today, it is considered outdated and is often replaced with terms like Global South, which are seen as more accurate and respectful. The experience of Latin American countries helped transform how scholars understand global inequality, emphasizing structural relationships rather than simple development gaps. Understanding these global divides as essential in addressing modern global issues such as trade inequality, debt crisis, and sustainable development.